On this Friday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael Cole and I are back together again, talking about the draft that was the second round in particular. Two new Memphis Grizzlies with one very important skill in common that I have a feeling my partner is going to be very excited about. Then we're going to talk about the craziness of saying that Zach Edey is one of the worst draft picks in the history of the NBA draft. That's pretty wild to say out loud. And we'll close out this episode with a busy weekend ahead for Memphis, from introductions to Kennard, team options, all of the above. Free agency gets underway. It's a chock full of information and fun episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It is Friday. Got to get down on Friday, as a wise philosopher once said. Fun. Looking forward to the weekend. I am partying with my partner, Damichael Cole. I am Joe Mullinax, and this is Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at Game Time. I love Game Time, and you should too. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, whatever the case may be, however you take in NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content. Hopefully Locked On Grizzlies is a part of that process. And Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Our numbers are looking pretty stout these last couple of days, partner. Thank you to everyone who has indeed made Locked On Grizzlies, between your individual show, which was one of the best rating show we've had in a long time. But between your solo show on Thursday, the different hits that I did for the Locked On Podcast Network, the Locked On Nows, lots of great folks in the comments, lots of folks with great interaction.
Subscribe.
Thank you guys. Yeah. Absolutely. Hope we had a lot of folks say this is our first time checking it out. So hopefully we keep getting those subscriber numbers up, and people are liking and commenting and rating and reviewing and letting us know how we're doing here on Locked On Grizzlies. Because we're only getting started here, right? The draft might be over, but free agency.
We got so much. We got so much to go through.
Yeah, and we're gonna jump right into closing out, putting a nice little bow on the NBA draft. The Memphis Grizzlies did indeed finally make a trade. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. But before that, they picked at number 39, which I'm going to be honest, I did not think they would do. But it turns out, after conversations with you and with others, the fact that Jaylen Wells is now one of the newest Memphis Grizzlies is not really a surprise. This is a young man that they've had their eye on for some time, an impressive three-point shooter, about 42% from beyond the arc, does some other things pretty well. And I mentioned in my Locked On Now for the pick to Michael, this is just another example, and the other young man, and not so much young, Cam Spencer, who we'll talk about here in a moment. Yeah. The Grizzlies very clearly have a type, right? Zach Edey fits this mold as well. Somebody that is kind of self-made, self-driven, intrinsically motivated, however you want to phrase it. Jaylen Wells starts at a smaller level of college basketball, works his way up, and has turned himself into a guy who's going to probably get a two-way contract and an opportunity to show what he can do with one of the better teams in the Western Conference in the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah, and I would say there's a decent chance that he's going to get a guaranteed spot on the roster.
We'll have to talk about that later in the show because the roster's getting thin.
It is, but there's going to be some movement, and that's kind of what this draft experience was kind of unveiling in a way. The fact that they took three players is a sign. There's going to be some movement, more movement to come. But before we get to all that, we can start by just addressing, Jaylen Wells. We'll start there. You mentioned that this is a guy that, I got a message probably 2-3 weeks ago. Said to Michael, Jaylen Wells, Tayshaun Prince, the Grizzlies front office, they like this guy. And I go look at it because, I hadn't seen much of Jaylen Wells. Plays in Pac-12. I knew he was, but hadn't watched much of him. And I'm watching him, and I'm like, yeah, I see it. 6'8", 41.7% three-point shooter. And, we'll talk about it over the course of this segment here because Cam Spencer, you talked about the one skill that these two guys have that I'm going to constantly harp on was shooting. And Joe, you've heard it. Our everydayers on Locked On Grizzlies have heard it over the past month. I've said it repeatedly. Yes, the Grizzlies, they have this need for big men, but right alongside it, like 1B was shooting. And that's what we saw displayed in the second round. That's it. That was what these two picks were about. But Jaylen Wells, you look at his stat line, you're talking about a guy who didn't even start at the beginning of the season. I mean, barely. He had a couple games that were close to DNPs. But over the course of the season, I think after the first 14 games, he was moving to the starting lineup at Washington State, and he didn't come off the bench ever again while he was there. You mentioned him starting off at Sonoma State in Division II basketball, earning this opportunity. 6'8" wing. The reason he was available at 39 is because at Washington State, he wasn't asked to, be the guy. He wasn't some, guy who's isolating and scoring, going at a bunch of different dudes and, pick and roll ball handler and playmaker. He wasn't doing much of that. I think, Joe, you mentioned it, the low turnover numbers, but it's part of that he's not asked to do a lot at this stage. But that's cool because, again, this draft, as I said before the draft, this is a complimentary draft for the Grizzlies. You got Ja, you got Dez, you got Jaren. You're building around those guys. And as you build around those guys, you don't need guys to come in and average 17 points as rookie. You just need guys who are going to take a little bit of pressure off of. You need guys that you can put on the floor, and defenses aren't going to completely disrespect them. And his shooting ability has the potential to be one of those things.
Yeah, he's impressive. I'm with you. I didn't know as much about him because I do actually do draft research, and I take pride in knowing a little bit of what I talk about. But I'm not going to pretend like I was an expert on this young man, Jaylen Wells.
Cam Spencer, I knew that guy to a T.
Yeah, I know you knew Cam Spencer. Since I was so tight with Donovan Clingan, I haven't had a chance to react to that yet. We'll do that later on in the show. Since I watched so much Donovan Clingan, I've watched a decent amount of Cam Spencer. And I think our mutual friend, Parker Fleming, talked about him just being a dog, right? And I think that's a really good way to describe him. He's 24 years old, so he's older than you, Damichael.
I can't wait for you to hear what I think his role could be, but go ahead.
I can't wait to hear that. If it's grandpa, then that would be good among the young Grizzlies. No, I'm just kidding. But his numbers are phenomenal in terms of the advanced numbers, the data. Yeah. He's a 50-50 ball guy. He really just played his tail off. And again, the Grizzlies zag when the rest of the NBA zigs, right? People talk about 5-out offense and that sort of thing. Then Zach Edey comes to Memphis, who took 1-3 in his college career, and he banked it in, right? It was like an accident that it went in the basket. There's a lot that Memphis does that doesn't go with the flow of the NBA's overall mindset. One of the main ways they do that is the age of these players. And I'm totally cool with that because, to your point a moment ago, they are trying to compete now. The idea of a project, and that's not to say that Zach Edey can't get better, because he can, or the Cam Spencer or Jaylen, that these guys can't improve. Right. But Spencer comes in as, again, I'm interested to hear what you think his role will be. I think this is a guy who, at 6'4", 6'5" wingspan, he checks my box of it's borderline, but he can play next to Ja Morant in a pinch. And he's a guy who could carve out a niche on this roster because he protects the basketball. He's a really solid Tyus Jones-esque assist-to-turnover ratio kind of guy. And again, that three-point shooting on 5.6 attempts per game, 44% from beyond the arc. I like that later in the second round than I would have earlier in the first.
Yeah, but he's a one-position guy. That might be the one. That's why he's here. He's not a point guard by any stretch of the imagination. He's a decent secondary playmaker. If you watch UConn play, I watched a lot of this guy. He is so good moving without the basketball. And the Grizzlies need more players like that. More guys who are willing to say, hey, I'll run around a full circle 2 times, not knowing if the ball is going to come to me. That is a skill. When Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, well, they know the ball's going to come to them eventually. But still, it is a skill to say, I'm going to run around here 3 times. I don't know if the ball's going to come back, but I want to distract the defense. I want to draw the defense, and I want to get myself open. You think about Cam Spencer potentially coming off screens, set by off the ball by Zach Edey and things like that. Like, there's some potential good things to come out of that. You talked about his assist to turnover ratio numbers. It's mostly because of him being a good secondary playmaker when he's coming off those screens, making the right decisions. It's not necessarily him being a pick and roll guy. Everybody get out of my way, clear out, let me go to work. That's not his game. But you talk about a guy 4 years, 4 out of his 5 seasons in college basketball, over 43% from 3-point range. Now getting back to the point that I was making earlier. 2 years ago, and I wrote a story that kind of dives deeper into this over at thecommercialappeal.com. But this second round was all about shooting, and I don't think people really remember it. But 2 years ago, that was the emphasis too. Kyle Anderson was replaced by Santi Aldama because of the thought that not Santi was a better player, he was a better fit. From the standpoint that the Grizzlies needed a stretch guy, a guy who could stretch the floor, at that forward spot, and he was thought of being a better shooter than Kyle Anderson. Then they went and got other guys, right? David Roddy. He shot really well his last year, at Colorado State. Jake LaRavia didn't shoot it a lot, 2.2 3-point attempts per game his last collegiate season. Kennedy Chandler shot over 3-point attempts his 1 year. And Vince Williams shot the ball terrific. All of those 4 players that were drafted shot 38% or better from 3-point range in their final collegiate season. I remember Zach Kleiman saying that class is going to open the floor up for the Grizzlies. Well, didn't really work out that way. At least it hasn't so far. David Roddy's not on the roster anymore. Kennedy Chandler's not on the roster anymore. You got Jake LaRavia and Vince Williams. And of those two, so far, Vince Williams is the only one to shoot above league average from 3-point range. So when you factor all that in, I know the question a lot of people is going to have, well, Damichael, how do we know these two guys are different? I'm going to throw one thing at you. One is the volume. Only Vince Williams matched these two guys' volume from a 3-point standpoint. We talked about in conference play, Jaylen Wells, and I highlight conference play because, again, when he first got there, he was just getting some minutes, barely played at the beginning of the season, all that. When he got in conference play, they knew he was one of the guys. He in conference play shot over 43% from 3-point range on over 5 attempts. Then Cam Spencer, that's Mr. Consistency. Over 5 3-point attempts per game, over 43% 3-point shooting in 4 of his 5 collegiate seasons. So you got two guys that have the volume, they have longevity in the case of Cam Spencer, and they project to be better 3-point shooters than those guys. So there are questions around the rest of the game that we'll talk about over the course of the next few days and whatnot. But from the standpoint of the Grizzlies' need in shooting, these guys check the boxes.
And when both of them have a common weakness over a tankathon of wingspan ratio, and then you draft Zach Edey, that's negated a smidge, right? The mammoth Edey will right some wrongs on that end. But how much they actually play together, where these guys fit two-way contract-wise, full roster spots, all that's going to shake out over the next several days and weeks. And here at Locked On Grizzlies, we'll have you covered on all of that sort of stuff. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, a chance for me to react to Zach Edey being in Memphis, not Donovan Clingan. And I want to say thank you to Krysten Peek. I want to say thank you to her because she brought out the best in me when it comes to Zach Edey. And I'll explain what I mean by that here momentarily. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. I got to tell you, Major League Baseball, there's nothing like it in the summer. Sports obviously slow down a little bit, but there's nothing like going out to the ball game, getting yourself a hot dog, sitting down, watching some baseball. I've done it with my folks. I've done it with my kids and my wife. It's really a great time, and I look forward to making some new memories this year, thanks in part to the Game Time app. It's not just other Major League Baseball games, major high-profile events, lots of different types of shows. Game Time can get you tickets to pretty much anything that you're looking for tickets to in terms of an event. You save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And they also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets, especially for Major League Baseball, with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. When we come back, a subtle thank you in the midst of chaos. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Joe Mullinax, joined by my wonderful co-host Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal. He is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. He did a phenomenal job covering the draft over the last few days, not just here at Locked On Grizzlies, but of course over at the CA. Make sure you're following him on X at Damichael C. If you don't already do so, you can follow me on X at Joe Mullinax. I have lots of new followers. And one of the reasons I have lots of new followers, Damichael, it's not because I'm some genius. It's because I pointed out to one Krysten Peek that not only is Zach Edey not one of the worst draft picks in draft history,
because that's what she said.
That is word for word what she said. He is not one of the worst picks in Memphis Grizzlies draft history. So she is just showing that she is not a student of history, or dare I say, Damichael, Griztory. Exhibit A, Hasheem Thabeet. How could anyone forget?
How could you forget?
Big man taken out of UConn, and to Jeff Calkins' credit over at the Daily Memphian. I think you've pointed this out in writing as well. Lots of folks have said it. Zach Edey, for all his faults, and we're going to talk about his faults, trust me. Again, I wish Donovan Clingan was here, but he's not. I'm defending Zach Edey, though. For all of Edey's faults, he does a lot of the things that Memphis needs him to do. He's going to be probably the best screener in the draft. That's probably the one place where he's better than Clingan right now, at least in my opinion. He's going to be a great rim protector, maybe not as nimble as Clingan, but he's going to be able to do that because of his size. He is going to be an excellent rebounder. He has better touch in and around the paint offensively, I would say, than Clingan as well. So all of those things, again, maybe Clingan projects to be a better outside shooter, whatever. We can talk more about that. Zach Edey, for all his faults, is not Hasheem Thabeet, namely because he actually gives a crap, right? And I'm proud of myself for filtering there. We're a family-friendly show.
There you go. Good job, Joe.
Thank you. Hasheem Thabeet could give two craps less about what was happening, and that became very evident early on in his stay in the Grizzlies. And that's one Grizzlies pick. At number 2 overall, that was a lot worse than what Memphis did at number 9, even if you're not a big Zach Edey fan. I'll give you some other names, just off the top of my head. From the NBA perspective, Kwame Brown, right? Holy crap. Terrible pick. What about the young man from the Cleveland Cavaliers? You remember his name, Damichael?
Anthony Bennett, yeah.
Oh, there he is, Anthony Bennett, right?
Yeah.
He was the number 1 overall pick, and he was atrocious. Then, from a Memphis perspective, Wade Baldwin IV. You guys remember Wade Baldwin IV? What about Jordan Adams, right? In the late first round. What about the fact that Jarnell Stokes became a member of the Memphis Grizzlies? Memphis' own, woohoo! Instead of, and in fairness, the whole NBA did this, instead of Nikola Jokic. He was on the board in Memphis. And the reason I bring that up is because Jarnell Stokes is a big. Guess who else was a big? Nikola Jokic, getting drafted during commercials for Taco Bell. So those are just off the top of my head. 3 or 4 examples of picks that I would say are decisively worse than what the Memphis Grizzlies.
She was in the moment, wasn't she, Joe?
That was wild. And then she said it was a C pick in that moment, which made no sense. They downgraded it to D. It was the worst first-round grade of any team from Yahoo Sports. Yep. There's lots of people from other outlets, ESPN, The Athletic, that liked the pick, or at the very least were like, hey, let's wait and see, right? But she... Again, Krysten Peek, I want to thank you, genuinely. And maybe we can have you on the show.
Yeah. You made Joe Mullinax a Zach Edey fan.
Because I was tweeting GIFs of staring into the abyss.
Yeah.
My Locked On Now about Zach Edey, a lot of you watched it. Thank you for doing that. Was he's really good at being big. I was struggling. I'm not going to lie. And I know my partner knows that I was struggling in that moment. But you brought me to the light. So thank you, Krysten Peek, for saying something so utterly ridiculous that it brought me to the defense of Zach Edey.
Yeah. Shout out to Krysten Peek. And you know what? I can't fathom how this could be one of the worst picks ever.
And it's illogical.
It doesn't make sense because at the end of the day, you can make the argument that they reached for him. I've said at the same time, I feel like from a value standpoint, you probably could have got him a few spots back. Cool. Even if you make that argument, what you can't argue is the Grizzlies. They lost Stephen Adams. They need someone who's a great screen setter to replace his screen setting ability. This is a guy who's very capable of doing that. They need someone who is an inside physical paint presence because they have Brandon Clark, they have Jaren Jackson Jr., but they don't have the physicality to nightly match up against Domantas Sabonis, Rudy Gobert, and those type of players. From a physical standpoint, 7'4", 300 pounds, it doesn't get much better than that. He crosses a lot of those boxes. Now, the weaknesses and things, we'll address those in the course of time. And I talked about it on yesterday's show, how the Grizzlies, they already got a plan. Like, you're not just going to throw him out there and say, he's not the most lateral guy on his feet. Let's have him out there guarding Kyrie Irving on the perimeter. You're not going to do that. Like, and quite frankly, what I saw someone point out is I think sometimes that's a lazy take with bigs saying, they can't guard on the perimeter, because you can't name 10 bigs in the NBA that can just do that. Like,
it's combine numbers in terms of lateral shuttle ability.
He did well,
comparable to a lot of athletic guys.
He did
now, granted,
well.
Part of that is his legs are longer, but it's not like he's running in quicksand.
Yeah, he did well. And again, the NBA spacing and stuff, it's still going to be an adjustment. I do believe that. But at the same time, worst pick ever, man, please. This is far from that. Like, I think the Grizzlies have enough around him. You know, if you were saying he was going to a team that doesn't really have much and they're going to rely on him to be the centerpiece to turning things around, I wouldn't even say worst pick ever then. But at the same time, I would not agree that he should be in that position. You got John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., G.G. Jackson, Vince Williams. Man's just got to play a role, and he'll be fine.
Going into next season, he will at best be the Grizzlies' 5th best player. At best. Just barring some other major change, which we're going to talk more about here in the next segment. What comes next for Memphis out of all of this?
And he's the 5th best player.
Right, and that's at best. Like, there is an outside shot that this guy can win Rookie of the Year. Because something that we don't talk about with Edey, or at least I haven't talked about it as much because I've been so in on Clingan. Donovan Clingan only played 20 to 25 minutes a game for UConn.
Yeah, Edey was
there's legitimate conditioning concerns, whether it's injury related, whether it's just not being in the kind of shape. Zach Edey played, I think, the entire 40-minute national championship game.
32 minutes a game. Yeah.
At 7'4", 300 pounds. This is a dude who is literally a foot taller than Ja Morant, who is almost 6 inches taller than Jaren Jackson Jr., is 40 pounds heavier than Jaren Jackson Jr., if not more. He averaged 32 minutes a game. He's not going to be asked to do that in Memphis.
No.
He's not going to be asked to do that. He's going to be asked to serve a role, do what he's capable of doing. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about is the counter argument whenever people say, he's not going to be able to defend on the perimeter. He's too slow. You know, they're going to take advantage of mismatches. Well, if somebody goes small against Zach Edey, he's 7'4", 300 pounds.
And that was Zach Kleiman's point. Zach
Kleiman's they have to respond to Edey. They have to make a plan for him.
Yeah. He's saying we don't have to be the ones who always have to adjust. Let's take him off the floor because they're going small. Nah, bullcrap. You got to match up against him. You want to go small? Okay. Put your 6'7" wing defender on this 7'4", 300-pound guy, and let's see how that works.
And another thing that makes him very different from Hasheem Thabeet couldn't catch a cold. He couldn't catch COVID in the spring of 2020, Hasheem Thabeet, okay? Zach Edey has very soft hands and a lot of touch at the basket.
Yeah.
Again, I would have rather have had Clingan, but if you're talking about plan Bs, you could have had a lot worse plan Bs. And we'll shout out to you, Krysten Peek, for bringing me to seeing the light and bringing me out of the darkness. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to talk about what comes next. It's going to be a very busy weekend for Memphis. Luke Kennard decisions, free agency getting underway. Lots of stuff to talk about going into our Monday episode. But first, you'll notice that Damichael and I, we have a wonderful relationship. We'd love to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies, provide analysis, opinions, whatever the case might be. We're not two elderly men that yelled at each other on a stage in front of no one like last night. Or we're not, ESPN or Fox Sports where we're trying to say outlandish things like Zach Edey's the worst pick. Like Yahoo Sports in particular, saying that Zach Edey is the worst pick or one of the worst picks in NBA draft history. We're trying to give you balanced analysis as best we can. We all have our biases, but we're trying to do the best we can to give you exactly what you're looking for that's different from other places. That's not just Locked On Grizzlies. That's Locked On Network Protocol. And you can check out all the great shows, over at Locked On Sports Today is the first of its kind 24/7 streaming channel over on YouTube. It's not like Fox Sports. It's not like ESPN. It's not like what happened on national television between two elderly men last night. It's people like Damichael and I having great conversations about basketball, football, baseball, any type of sport, any type of league. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today over on YouTube as the first of its kind 24/7 streaming channel on that platform. You can also check it out over at Amazon under the Free Fire TV channels app. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die whip alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Things like superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether it's speed, power, or style that gets your motor running, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die car, you will always find exactly what you are looking for. And the eBay Guaranteed Fit guarantees parts that will fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it is easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die whip alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to United States customers. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are closing out this Friday edition of the show, looking ahead to a busy weekend in Memphis for the Grizzlies. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host Damichael Cole, the commercial appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Make sure you're following him on X for all the great content he puts out at Damichael C. You can follow me on X at Joe Mullinax. Again, make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing. It's been a good week for us here at Locked On Grizzlies. The podcast continues to grow. I think we keep getting better and better with every episode. Let us know what you think in the comments. And again, make us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. And there's going to be a lot of content to consume, partner. We leave the NBA draft behind. Hopefully I don't have to think about Krysten Peek again unless she agrees to come on Locked On Grizzlies, which would be great. But beyond that, chances are she's not going to agree, which is fine. There's lots of things happening in Memphis around these Grizzlies. The draft ends, and you jump right into the next stage of the offseason, where the first major domino to that, for Memphis at least, is going to be the Luke Kennard decision with that contract and that team option.
Yeah, June 29th. Mark the date. And, this is something that we did ask Zach Kleiman about after the first round of the draft. And he kind of said the same thing they said previously, which is the Grizzlies do feel strongly about Luke Kennard, which is not a surprise. I've kind of talked about the idea. I mean, we saw what they did in this draft. And I didn't say that in the first segment, and we didn't talk about it in the first segment, but I know some people are wondering, like, man, the fact that they got two shooters, is that any reflection on Luke Kennard? I don't think so. It's more so the fact that Luke Kennard and Desmond Bane just aren't enough. Like, that you have two guys pretty much that teams fear, from beyond the arc. Whereas on a bunch of other teams, when you're playing Boston, there's no one to leave open, in that starting lineup. So the Grizzlies just are trying to balance out things a little bit more instead of, Desmond Bane's on the floor. Okay, guard Des, and the other guys, if they make it, so be it. And then he comes out of the game and Luke Kennard comes in. It's okay, guard Luke Kennard, and if anyone else makes it, so be it. You want to get past that. You want to have multiple really dynamic three-point options on the floor. But with all that being said, I do think, we'll find out very soon. We'll be talking about it on the next episode. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff on the next episode. And then, but yeah, that's the main one. And then draft introductions will be happening as well. So that'll be our introduction to Zach Edey, as well as the second round selections. I know a lot of people have questions on what's going to happen with Zach Edey in terms of Summer League and the Olympic team. We'll talk about that, and we'll ask those questions. We'll get everything answered on that end. It sounds like right now, the Grizzlies have not made a firm decision at this point on if he will be available for Summer League. But I tell you what, Joe, if they got Zach Edey for Summer League, because remember, Trey Jemison and Scottie Pippen, at the last point that I checked, both of those guys are going to play Summer League basketball with the Grizzlies. So you're telling me if you got Scottie Pippen at point guard, and then you throw out there Cam Spencer as your 2, maybe Jaylen Wells as your 3, G.G. Jackson as your 4, and Zach Edey as your 5 with Trey Jemison off the.
Sounds like we're celebrating in Vegas, partner.
That's what it sounds like, doesn't it? But yeah, they
good starting 5.
Yeah. Yeah. So and then there's free agency, Joe, and
Mm.
that's another one that everyone's asking about in terms of what does it mean right now. We touched on it a little bit earlier. I said I think there's a decent chance that Jaylen Wells will be on a standard contract, and one of the reasons why, Joe, is because if you put him on a two-way, and you put Cam Spencer on a two-way, Trey Jemison and Scottie Pippen Jr. are both on two-way deals that go into next season. You only can have 3 players on two-way deals. So I think is from that standpoint, all signs point to the fact that Jaylen Wells will be on the roster again. And then if you go to the roster right now, that gives you 15 guys under standard contracts, pending what happens with Luke Kennard. If you pick up the option, that's 15. If you don't pick it up, that's 14. But it sounds like they're going to have 15 guys, which is the most you can have. But I would point out the fact that the Grizzlies still can make some moves on some guys in free agency for minimum deals or whatever. They just got to release them before the season starts. Remember, your roster, this is what we saw in Memphis last summer. I don't know if people remember, but when they picked up, was it Josh Christopher and Isaiah Todd? Remember Isaiah Todd? He was a Grizzly for a little bit.
I do remember Isaiah Todd.
But when they got both of those guys, they were over the 15-man number. And, Joe, we were on here talking about it. Who's going to be the odd man out? Is it this guy? Is it that guy? And, as time showed, Josh Christopher and Isaiah Todd both, were cut, were waived from the Grizzlies. So, look, still plenty of time to figure this thing out in terms of which guys they could potentially trade, which guys they could potentially waive, whatever the case, however they figure this thing out. But I wouldn't stress over that number right now. But you know what? We're going to get all those questions answered from Zach Kleiman, and we'll have all that covered in the next episode of Locked On Grizzlies.
Speaking of that next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to have that information. The Edey Olympic team thing, I hadn't even thought of that yet, but I'm pretty sure he's in the mix for Team Canada, right? So
yeah, he was on the preliminary roster. Now, I saw something where his jersey was not listed among the guys who have jersey numbers as of yesterday. Makes me think he's probably not going to be on the Olympic team because he was on the preliminary roster, but we'll get all of it confirmed before we kind of just speculate on that end as well. So
we'll have confirmation on that. We will have a decision on the Luke Kennard option. Real quick, partner, it sounds like, because you talked about them having 15, you think they're going to pick it up?
Yeah, I do. At this point, I do. I mean, you can make the argument and say, well, Damichael, they went and got a couple shooters because they're preparing, for the exit strategy, right? They're losing one of the NBA's best shooters, so go get 2 of the best shooters available in the draft. That makes sense, but I mean, it's tough to say because the fact that it's gotten dragged out this long tells me that they're thinking really hard about that $14.8 million number, and they're going to be in the first apron if they pick it up. So it's a lot to take in, but I just don't. I know that they value this guy. That's what I keep going back to. It would surprise me a little bit. It wouldn't be the most surprising thing in the world because, again, it's been dragged out this long. It wouldn't be the most surprising thing in the world, but I know that they value his shooting. It's clear, the way they target these guys in the draft, the way they targeted the 2022 draft class and picking up, Kennard at the deadline that year in 2023 as well. So he is valued here. It's just at that number. That's going to be the question. And I can't wait till we get that figured out because I still think right now he'll be back.
So I agree with you at this point because of their second round selections. They value shooting. And I pointed out on X the idea that you mentioned it a moment ago with the roster just needing to be at 15 by opening night, essentially.
Yeah.
There's still a trade deadline, right? Like they could pick up the loot. And one of the positives of the way that the Klingon stuff went down, that they weren't able to trade up, they still have all their first round picks.
They got a lot of assets.
So they could pair those assets at the trade deadline with a Western Conference team's best player who, because everybody in the West apparently thinks they're going to be good. And that's not going to be the case. There's going to be a couple teams that aren't good. And maybe you can get somebody for a cheaper price than you would have gotten on draft night. They have options there. And that Kennard expiring contract, I think that almost is as important as the fact that he's one of the NBA's best shooters. So Damichael and I agree. We think Luke Kennard will be back. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the draft introductions for those 3 guys, all sorts of different fun things going into free agency. That'll be the focus of our Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Make us a part of your everyday Memphis Grizzlies and NBA content consumption. Check out Locked On Sports today after this show is over. Go check it out over on YouTube or on Amazon under the Free Fire TV channels app. And make sure you're having a great weekend. Stay cool out there as the summer heats up. Free agency is the next step, and Damichael and I are going to have you covered all along the way. For Damichael, I am Joe. Stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. Have a great weekend. Enjoy all the craziness that is the NBA offseason, and we'll catch you on Monday to explain it all on Locked On Grizzlies.